visitors.
Can everyone hear me? Is it clear? Alright, thank you. We are starting now. So, good evening ladies and gentlemen. Salam sejahtera kepada semua. Assalamualaikum. Right? Welcome to this public forum entitled Race, Religion and Royalty in Malaysia. My name is Dekjo, currently a second-year economics student in ANU. And I feel so honored to be nominated as an MC for this forum with such a hot topic. I hope there isn't any special branch from High Commission today. If there is, we still welcome you. This forum is jointly organized by the Malaysian Student Organisation, MSO, and the Malaysian Interest Group, MIG. For Malaysian Interest Group MIG, it is a newly revived group which focuses on political and ongoing issues in Malaysia. It has its regular meeting once in 2 weeks, mostly on Sunday evening 4 PM to 6 PM in Lina Kamil Level 3 Common Room. To know more details, please feel free to look for Galvin, Aslam, or myself. Before we officially commence this forum, I would like to ask for everyone's kind effort to turn their mobile phone into silent mode to avoid any disturbance during the process. Thank you very much. 2014 is a tough, challenging year for Malaysia with perpetually tragedies. First, we have political conviction with an unusual speech from the Court of Appeal on our opposition leader, Mr. Anwar Ibrahim Sodomi trial, and the late Mr. Karpal Singh's under Sedition Act, and then the loss of the Malaysian airline MH370, and soon by the passing away of the prominent social activist, late Miss Irene Fernandez, and more recently, a devastating, tragic car accident that robbed the 74-year-old Mr. Karpal Singh, the Tiger of Jelatong's life. I hereby appeal everyone to give a 1-minute silence to commemorate the deceased and also to extend our deepest condolences to the people who lost their loved ones. Right, thank you very much. Let me begin with a brief introduction on our panelists today. We are glad to have YB Tony Pao, a second-term member of Parliament of the Democratic Action Party, DAP, a graduate from Cable College, Oxford University with a degree of Philosophy, Politics and Economics, PPA. Currently, he is one of the 6-member Public Account Committee of the Federal Parliament, Malaysia. He was supposed to speak at the Malaysian Summit of Australia, MASA, in Melbourne today, until his invitation was denied due to the threat from the event sponsor to withdraw its sponsorship of 20,000 of Australian dollar. So we can assume that our government value his presence at 20,000 Australian dollar, and we have him here free of charge. Thanks for coming once again. And we have Dr. John Swanston, a visiting fellow for Department of Political and Social Change, College of Asia Pacific at the ANU. His area of expertise focuses on Southeast Asian studies and Asian history. He has been studying on Malaysia since the 1960s and enjoyed a sound reputation among research scholars on Malaysia. He is a regular columnist in New Mandela, an academic blog initiated by CAP of ANU, and authored more than 20 publications on Southeast Asia. Aslam Abdul Jalil, the coordinator of the founding committee Malaysian Interest Group, a final year ANU student graduating with a degree of economics. He is active in various programs with humanitarian cause, particularly in the Palestinian and Israel conflict and the refugee issues in Australia. This forum will be constructed in a way where the three speakers, Mr. Tony Pua, Dr. John Funston, and Aslam Abdul Jalil, each will be allocated 30, 20, and 10 minutes to express their view on the 3 R's. The speakers are allowed to divert from the topic as long as it deems relevant. Q&A will open to the floor after all speakers have their speech delivered. Please mention to whom your questions would like to direct to in order to enhance the flow of this forum. There will be a light refreshment served after the event by the Malaysian Student Organisation. I wish everyone had a fruitful and enjoyable forum. Next, we would like to invite our Petaling Jaya MP, Mr. Tony Pua, to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dick Joe, as well as the Malaysian Student Organisation, MSO, of Australian National University, as well as the Malaysian Interest Group in Canberra for inviting me to the forum today. The invite came after I was kicked out of the Masa Forum. And let me emphasize here that I do not blame the students. I think the pressure put on these students, many of whom are government scholars, is immense. And I can completely understand why I cannot come to their forum because of sponsorship, because of other threats and intimidation placed upon them. So the blame lies entirely with the Malaysian government and not with the students. But I'm glad, however, the MSO here seems to have a different view of things and was happy to invite me here since I became available on the 22nd of April. So once again, thank you very much for having me here, and this is my first trip to Canberra. And it may have been where I studied had I not gotten to the other school in UK. I still get the acceptance letter I had from the school in 1990. I found it when my mom asked me to clear my boxes of rubbish with my own kampong in my file. I was opening all my files and hey, letter of acceptance from ANU, I forgot I applied. And to be honest, the topic today, race, religion and royalty, perhaps the most relevant topic to be discussed in Malaysia today, was not the topic that I expected to be asked from me by the forum organizers today. It is heated, it is sensitive, it is also occasionally controversial. But given that the topic was put in place, I'm more than happy to take it up because it is issues that needs to be addressed if Malaysia is to be able to continue to grow as a vibrant, united and cohesive country in the future. Now, we all know that the sensitive issues of race, religion and royalty, regardless of whether you are from the opposition side of the divide or the government side of the divide, has been controversial and has been deemed abused for political and vested interest groups in Malaysia. Now, what I'm more concerned about, beyond just the abuse, is perhaps the often less highlighted aspect of these issues, which is the consequential disregard for the rule of law and the sanctity of the federal constitution in the country. Does it still have meaning, the federal constitution, does it still have meaning in our country? Or is it just a rhetoric? We talk about protecting the constitution, we talk about the rule of law, we talk about compliance with the social contract of our founding fathers in the country. Is it just purely rhetoric, or is it in substance? Are we still having any regard for the essence of our constitution? What have we witnessed over the last 5 years? Given that the topic is broken into 3 R's, I'll deal with 1 R at a time. We have seen increasing militancy among many interest groups, so to speak, with racial supremacy demands. Or many of us know it as Ketuanan Melayu. It is not even a quiet pretense to try and achieve the supremacy of one race over the other. It is an outright proclamation, whether in parliament or outside, for Ketuanan Melayu over all aspects of Malaysian life, political, social, and economic. And we have seen the rise of entities such as Perkasa, which didn't exist before. It has come to the forefront, comprising predominantly of UMNO members. They are led by individuals like Ibrahim Ali and Zulkifli Nordin, some of you may know. The movement isn't defined by mere demands that Malays who are in need of help be given the necessary assistance. That wouldn't be offensive at all. If they are Malays, they are poor, they are in need of help, for help to be granted to them, nobody will object to that cause. What becomes the main agenda for these groups, really, like I said earlier, is the dominance in all aspects of life in Malaysia. For them, metaphorically, a Malay vote is worth more than a non-Malay vote. These views have gained increasing acceptance by the mainstream UMNO, and any attempts at greater democratization of the Malaysian political space by entities such as PUA, Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia, or any others like Komango, or political parties like Pakatan Rakyat, is deemed anti-Malay. So when you fight for equality within the scope of the constitution, it is deemed anti-Malay. Now, the situation has reached farcical proportions. You know, when you have what happened recently, let's give some examples. Number one, we all know the political joke, the faux pas by the Prime Minister over the kangkong issue. I say kangkong, everyone laughs. And it was an economic issue. It was about the price of goods. It's about the role of government in inflation in this country. Now, what one of our state assemblymen in Penang from PKR, in Kailun, what he did was he put up a big caricature of the Prime Minister, and among the protesters, some of them stuffed kangkong into his face. Not very nice. And for a state assemblyman, perhaps he shouldn't have done it, because it's disrespectful. Whatever it is, he may be from the other side of the political divide, but he is still our Prime Minister. Fair enough. So you can criticize him for being disrespectful. That, I think, is perfectly acceptable. But what happened was the entire campaign against Kailun and Pakatan Rakyat became the fact that Kailun criticized Prime Minister, Kailun made fun of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is Malay, the Prime Minister is a Muslim, and hence he is anti-Malay, he's anti-Muslim. That's where it became farcical. Teresa Top, MP for Sputnik, made a video during Chinese New Year. Some of you may have watched the video. For those who haven't, you may want to watch it just to see for yourself that I'm not bullshitting here. It was a video that was a satire. You had 3 guests, one feng shui master, one fortune teller, talking about Malaysian political stories, like the kidnapping of the Sabah Coast, like price hikes, and stuff like that. it was making fun of Barisan Nasional politics. Now, it was perhaps painful for some of these Barisan Nasional leaders to watch. But the problem is, you can criticize the video because it's lousy, it's not funny, it's not relevant, the facts are wrong. But what happened during the entire exercise and demonization of both Teresa Kok and the video was that they accused the video of insulting the Agong, when there was no mention at all in the entire video about the king. The video was accused of being anti-Islam, when there was no mention at all, and we are very careful because we know we get under headlines, anything wrong we talk about Malays or Islam. There was no mention at all about anything anti-Malay or anti-Islam, but the whole video was demonized as anti-Malay and anti-Islam. Police reports were filed against these videos as well as Kailun, and these people were all investigated. So race has become a predominant weapon by those in power to suppress the opposition. Any issues that you raise that has substance, that has traction, it became a racial issue. I will lead a protest on GST later. I'm not sure whether anti-GST will become anti-Malay as well. But no, that's how the situation has become completely ridiculous. In Parliament, the MPs from Barisan Nasional, I was sitting there, they stood up and they were accusing Teresa Kok of insulting Malays, insulting Muslims. We stood up, asked them to refer to which sentence, which line, which minute within the video that they that showed that all this anti-Islam, anti-Malay thing was in the video. None of them could reply. But because a lie is repeated many, many times, it is to create the impression that we are anti-Malays, anti-Islam. I talk too much. I just like to refer perhaps back to the Constitution. What does it actually say with regards to race? The most well-cited article in the Constitution is Article 153, where it shall be the responsibility of the Yang Di-Pertuan Agong to safeguard the special position of the Malays and natives of any states in Sabah and Sarawak and the legitimate interests of other communities in accordance to the provisions of this article. Article 153(2), 153(2), notwithstanding anything in this Constitution, but subject to the provisions of Article 40 of this article, the Yang Di-Pertuan Agong shall exercise his functions under this Constitution and federal law in such manner as may be necessary to safeguard the provisions of the Malays, special provisions of the Malays and natives of any of the states of Sabah and Sarawak, to ensure the reservation of Malays and natives of any of the states of Sabah and Sarawak of such proportion as may be deemed reasonable in the public service, scholarships, exhibitions, and other similar educational or training privileges or special facilities given or accorded by the federal government, and when any permit or license for the operation of any trade or business is required by federal law, then subject to provisions of that law and this article of such permits and licenses. And Article 12, bracket 1, says, without prejudice to the generality grounds of only of race, religion, descent, or place of birth. And that is the position that parties like DAP, as well as the civil society in Malaysia, believes in. But what the Constitution is, and what it has been interpreted and taken to by those movements such as Perkasa, is two completely different things. You have seen how there's special rights for the Malays, and that's not denied. There's special position of Malays in the Constitution, that is not denied, but that does not give total dominance or what they ask for, Ketuanan Melayu in Malaysia. Now that, from race, it is intertwined inextricably with religion. And religion, I can give many examples. two key examples that's happening today. All these are happening in the last 5 years. Number one, everyone knows the Allah controversy. Now, I do not want to get into a theological debate as to whether Allah is exclusive or not exclusive. But I will highlight the fact that the issue of the term, the use of the term Allah in the Alkitab or the Malay version of the Bible has never been an issue in Malaysia or Malaya or during the British colonies for decades, perhaps even hundreds of years. Never an issue. Why is it suddenly an issue over the last 5 years? And I will argue that it is an issue over the last 5 years because purely of politics. It has gotten to such, again, farcical proportions because when it was raised, then what happens to all the Bumiputras in Sabah and Sarawak who are native Christians, who have been praying to Allah all these decades? Do they suddenly have to change? And you have ministers like Datuk Sri Najib Razak who said that no, Sabah and Sarawak can continue using, the exclusivity only applies to Malaysia, to West Malaysia, to the peninsula. And that makes it completely ridiculous because then the question, and this was asked by my colleague from PAS, Mahfuz Omar, in Parliament, who asked the Minister in charge of religion in the Prime Minister's Department, Datuk Sri Jamil K. Johari, I think. Jamil K. Johari asked him, so the question is Allah by religion exclusive or not exclusive? Because if it is exclusive, it doesn't matter whether it's East or West Malaysia, it should be exclusive. If it is not exclusive, then it doesn't matter, then there's no reason for it to be banned in West Malaysia. You cannot have one Malaysia, two Allahs. it defies logic, but yet it is persisted. That position has persisted. It has taken to the extent where the Prime Minister himself last year, during his speech celebrating the Muslim New Year, Mahal-Hijrah, where he said they will defend the exclusive use of Allah by Muslims. Now, if you ask me personally, is that what Najib really believes in? No. Because I know that at a personal level, Najib is probably fairly exposed to global affairs, relatively westernized, he knows what happens out there, but he's taking a position purely because of politics. Okay? Politics of religion. Now let's look at the Constitution again. Article 11. Article 11 says that every person has the right to profess and practice his religion, subject to clause 4, to propagate it. No person shall be compelled to pay any tax, the proceeds of which are specially allocated in whole or in part for the purposes of the religion other than his own. Every religious group has its rights to manage its own religious affairs, to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes, and to acquire own properties and hold on and administer it in accordance with the law. Now, the only restriction is you cannot propagate it to Muslims. And in Malaysia, I think the non-Muslim community accepts that restriction. So anything you do, just don't propagate it to Muslims. And this is something that's respected by most, if not all, non-Muslim religious bodies in the country. And in this particular case, this is where the controversy arise. So if the Alkitabs are not meant to propagate Christianity to Muslims, then why ban the Alkitabs? No, this Allah controversy has become a very divisive issue in the country. The government has taken the case to the courts to declare the use of Allah by non-Muslims as unconstitutional or against the practice in the religion or against the law. The second case, which is more heartbreaking, is the case of the custodial battle by this lady, Deepa, where the husband, originally married as a Hindu, converted, took the child away, converted the child, and then the Sharia court obviously Sharia court has given custody of the child to the father who converted, and subsequently when the case was challenged in the civil court, the civil high court actually granted custody of the son, 6 years old only, back to the mother. And this isn't the first case, so that is actually quite normal. It happens with relative frequency in Malaysia. But what was perhaps more controversial is that when the child, the 6-year-old child, was actually snatched away by the father, who went to the house, perhaps you can say assaulted the mother to some extent, took the child away. A police report was filed, and the IGP, Inspector General of Police, refused to take any action to seek, to bring back the child or to take action against the father who went to the house to snatch the child. And the reason he gave, there's 2 competing court orders, so we don't know which to follow, and hence we are not going to take any action. And that's sad because in our constitution, as far as earlier case studies are concerned, the civil courts should prevail. And this is even supported by some of the Barisan Nasional ministers, people like Najib Razak, people like Joseph Guru. But within the cabinet, the Home Minister supported the position of the IGP. And this is where the conflict and crisis in Malaysia is happening. If this were to continue, there may be a collapse in the system. We have 2 parallel jurisdictions. We don't know which one, is superior to the other. But if you look at the Constitution, it actually says quite clearly, Article 12(4), for the purposes of Clause 3 of the religion of a person under the age of 18 years shall be decided by his parent or guardian. Now, in the Constitution, it's defined that anything that is singular is also plural. So it's like law, the definitions, you just use a singular term, it means both. So in this case, the mother has a right to decide on the religion of the child as well. And because the marriage was in the civil courts, the dissolution of that marriage has to be decided in the civil court. Now, I'll just bring you back a bit to the history of the Constitution over the clause freedom of religion, the Islam being the religion of the Federation. Chief Justice Abdul Hamid, this is not a Malaysian Abdul Hamid, this is the Pakistani Abdul Hamid of the Reed Commission, who was helping draft the Malaysian Constitution. Okay, opined that the provisions on Islam as a religion of the state is innocuous. However, secular as intended by the founding fathers does not connote anti-religious or anti-Islamic state of governance, which means that it's a secular state but allows the presence of Islamic institutions and Islamic practices within the Malaysian state of governance. The Constitution envisages Sharia laws which would govern the personal law requirements of Muslims, though it recognizes that the Sharia would not be made the supreme law. This was his statement when the Constitution was being drafted. All these views were espoused by the Malaysian Supreme Court in the landmark case of Cik Omar bin Cik So versus Public Prosecutor. This was in 1988, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so it was the case was actually, there was a case study actually in the Malaysian Federal Court. The court reiterated the secular character of the law and governance system which resulted from colonial Anglo-Malay treaties. It also emphasized that the British establishment of secular institutions separated Islam into public and private aspects. Islamic law was rendered isolated in a narrow confinement of the law of marriage, divorce, and inheritance only. It is only in this sense of dichotomy that the framers of the Constitution understood the meaning of the word. This was in the judgment of Cik Umar bin Cik Sur versus the public prosecutor. But despite whatever that is in the Constitution, what is happening today is different. The actions taken by the authorities, those in power, the police, are different. And there's a degree of helplessness among Malaysians. What do? You cannot appeal to anyone to help you despite the law seemingly being on your side. Now, if you look at another statement made by the Mufti of Perak, Tan Sri Harusani Zakaria, just wanted to quote him. He labelled the Turun protesters, which was last year in December, to protest against price hikes in the country, as bunga, I think that's the way to pronounce the word, or traitors to the country who should be arrested for being traitors to the government, and accordingly in Islam, bloodshed is permitted on the bunga. And no action was taken against him because he was the Mufti of Perak, despite the clear seditious nature of this statement. And that's the abuse of religion, perhaps, to influence or decide on the political system in Malaysia. And when we talk about sedition, it comes to the next, and perhaps the last bit, royalty. The late Karpal Singh, our national chairman, was found guilty of sedition, in this case against the Perak royalty. Now, what was Karpal Singh found seditious of? What did he say that was so seditious? Did he say that we should get rid of royalty? No. What he said was essentially that the Constitution provides that the royalty can be sued in court. He said that in the light of the Perak crisis, where there was a change of government midway due to the appointment of the Menteri Besar by the Perak Sultan. Okay? And it is specifically provided in the Constitution, Article 182, the special court. There shall be a court which shall be known as the special court and shall consist of the Chief Justice of the Federal Court, who shall be chairman, the Chief Judges of the High Courts, and 2 other persons who hold or have held office as Judge of the Federal Court or High Court appointed by the Conference of Rulers. Any proceedings by or against the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or the ruler of a state in his personal capacity shall be brought in a special court established under Clause 1. And 3, the special court shall have exclusive jurisdiction to try all offences committed in the Federation by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or the ruler of a state, and all civil cases by or against the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or ruler of a state, notwithstanding where the cause of action arose. In the Constitution, it is provided that the ruler of a state and even the king can be brought to court. Of course, albeit in a special court, but they can be prosecuted. And all Karpal did then was to make this fact known. But he was found guilty of sedition. Why? Because in Malaysia, the laws of sedition, thanks to our British colonial masters, the truth is not a defense. You can tell the truth, but if it creates or incites unhappiness, anger among the public, it is seditious. Okay, let me read to you the Sedition Act, part of it, 1948, Section 3.1. Those acts defined as having a seditious tendency are acts with a tendency to bring into hatred or contempt or to excite disaffection against any ruler or against any government. I'm being seditious here. B, to excite the subjects of a ruler or the inhabitants of any territory governed by any government to attempt to procure in the territory of the ruler or governed by the government the alteration otherwise than by lawful means of any matter as by law established. That's not the normal one. C, to bring into hatred or contempt or to excite disaffection against the administration of justice in Malaysia or in any state. D, to raise discontent or disaffection among the subjects of Yang di-Pertuan Agong or the ruler of any state, or among the inhabitants of Malaysia of any state. Now this D is very interesting. It means that if I make anyone in Malaysia unhappy, I may be subject to sedition. E, to promote feelings of ill will or hostility between different races or classes of population of Malaysia. And F, to question any matter, right, status, position, privilege, sovereignty, and prerogative established or protected by provisions of Part 3 of the Federal Constitution in Article 152, 153, 181 of the Federal Constitution. So it's quite clear in the Sedition Act, and Karpal himself told the DAP leadership, despite what he said is part of the Constitution, okay, he is likely to be found guilty of sedition, because you can't fight against the act. It is an all-encompassing act. He knew that. We could only get out of it on technicality, but once we're asked to defend the clause, the charge, you will likely be found guilty. It was also quite funny in court, where it was stated by the witness that yes, the Constitution actually says the ruler can be sued in court. And what did the Deputy Public Prosecutor say? She said, yes, it is the Constitution, but that Constitution cannot be read to the layman. You can tell it in an academic conference, but to the layman, they may get upset, they get angry, it becomes seditious. So that's our Constitution. So what we are having here is a case, as I started my speech just now, whereby we have a Constitution, and we are quite clear what the Constitution says, but what is being implemented, what is being accepted as law, what is being imposed as the will of the people, differs significantly from the Constitution. And there's nothing those who are deemed victims can do about it. Because there's a collusion of interest to protect the interest. If you are looking at it from a political theory perspective, it is a clear example of the tyranny of the majority. You have the collusion of interest between the royalty, the ones in power, the government, the police, the judiciary, and the executive. And once all these people who are in power share that same interest to define the Constitution in a completely our founding fathers, there's almost nothing a victim can do to achieve justice. And it's a scary thought. It is a scary thought that our system is not ruled by what is written in our law books, but what the majority powers feel they want to do in the country. Is there a way around it? There is, but it's not easy. That's what we're trying to do here. Change the government. But that's my position. That may not be your position. Your position is to listen and weigh the pros and cons and decide for yourself. I would just like to end by referring to one of the first books I read in political theory, Alexis de Tocqueville, who saw the majority's tyranny over political and social minorities as a constant threat to the American democracy in his pre-Civil War travels in the United States. While visiting the state of Pennsylvania, when he asked why no free blacks had come to vote in a local election he was observing, he was told that while free blacks had legal right to vote, they feared the consequences of exercising it. Thus, he wrote, the majority not only makes the laws, they can break them as well. And this was an often cited case in the 19th century in the US, Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson. Decisions ruled that African Americans were socially inferior and thus not guaranteed equal protection of the laws, despite the fact that the Constitution then had already stated otherwise. To overcome this form of majority tyranny, maintained for nearly 100 years in the United States, the African American minority, just over 12% of the population in the late 1800s, had to confront the reality that nearly all political avenues were closed to it. In the South, the right to vote had effectively been taken away, and in the North, it was ineffectual. But change did happen in the United States. It came about because of the leadership of a few of the civil society, most famous being Martin Luther King, to bring about equality and changes on what is right for the country. And I think despite all the negative things I've perhaps raised on the seemingly insurmountable challenge that we face today with the collision of interest in Malaysia to protect the interest of the minority at the expense of the minority, protect the interest of the majority at the expense of the minority, we believe that if we continue to spread what is right, and hopefully the younger generation of Malaysians, as they grow and continue to contribute to Malaysia in the future, change can actually happen. And it is partly because we need the young Malaysians to be active in Malaysia, or at least politically aware in Malaysia, why I'm more than happy usually to travel to universities where there is a crowd of 10 or 100 to speak to young Malaysians, because they represent the future of Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Funston, a research fellow on, from College of Asia Pacific, to give his speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to take part in this forum. I'm delighted to see that the students here are becoming active again. They've played a very constructive role in recent years in terms of bringing Malaysian matters to the attention of ANU. We've just heard a very engaged presentation from an active politician in Malaysia. My talk will be followed by somebody who I'm sure will have all the exuberance and the idealism of youth. This is the boring bit, I'm afraid. Now, if you're like me, your morning reading will include Urzan Malaysia. And almost on a daily basis you will find in Urzan Malaysia warnings, dire warnings about the dangers to stability in the country from disregarding the Constitution. And what do they mean by this? Well, they mean quite a few things, but in particular, I think there are three things that stand out. The first is that these are people that are causing these threats are people who don't accept the idea of Ketuanan Melayu, political dominance of the Malays, particularly as expressed in Article 153, which we've already heard a little bit about in the previous talk. Secondly, in not recognising that Islam is the official state religion and Malaysia is an Islamic state. And thirdly, in not recognising that any criticism or rejection of orders by the Agong or Sultan amounts to sedition. Now, the argument that I'm going to present today is just simply that some of these things certainly have become part of the Constitution in more recent years. But I want to go back and have a look at the original Constitution and argue that while it's true that there was a special position given to Malays, a special position given to Islam, and a special position given to the royalty, to the rulers. This did not amount to Ketuanan Melayu or an Islamic state, or that it gave the rulers absolute power and being beyond criticism. So I want to try and develop this argument by looking at the constitutional development, going right back to the time of colonial rule in Malaysia, moving on then to 1946, the Malayan Union, the 1948 Federation Agreement, the London negotiations on establishing terms of reference for the Reed Commission, which was appointed to draw up a draft constitution for Malaysia by foreign legal experts. By the Alliance submission to the Reed Commission, to the Reed report itself, and then the final negotiations. So let me start then with the colonial period. Britain maintained a fiction throughout that it did not rule directly in Malaysia, apart from strait settlements, Penang and Malacca. They only ruled as advisors to the existing Malaysian royalty. And the various agreements that were concluded with the royalty at this time always included a special section, a section on the special position of Malays in relation to land ownership, admission to the public service, permits for business operations, and scholarships to other educational systems. Sounds a bit familiar. It kept on coming up again and again. In 1946, just after the end of the war, after the Japanese occupation in Malaysia and so on, the British tried to introduce a very radical change with the Malayan Union. They stripped the rulers of all their powers, except in the area of Islamic affairs. They removed the special position of Malays and extended citizenship to very large numbers, almost all the Chinese and Indians, most of whom, of course, have been brought into the country to develop the economy in the late 19th and early 20th century. There were some who had been there a bit longer than that also, but the vast majority came about that time. To the extent where, if you included Singapore in this calculation, even by the 1920s, Malays had become a minority in this area. So, fearful that the Malay sovereignty would no longer be recognised and they would not be able to compete on equal footing with the non-Malays, Malays formed UMNO and mobilised against this. That was a very successful movement as far as they were concerned, and resulted in the 1948 Federation Agreement, which restored the position of the rulers, and indeed strengthened the position of the rulers in some ways by establishing a conference of rulers with wide-ranging responsibilities to review legislation passed by councils that were established, including the British and senior members of the Malay royalty. It also introduced a more restricted form of citizenship. It didn't completely prevent non-Malays from acquiring citizenship, and indeed about half the Indians and about a quarter of the Chinese were able to acquire it. But they also reinstated the Malay special position, with the British High Commissioner given special responsibility to ensure that this was safeguarded. Now, as part of the development towards independence, elections were held in 1955, in July 1955, which the newly formed alliance, led by the Malay, United Malays National Organisation, or UMNO, in coalition with a Chinese represented Malaysian Chinese Association and the Malaysian Indian Congress, were very successful. They won 51 out of 52 seats, and with that, they very quickly went to London to hold negotiations about what terms of reference there should be agreed on for the Reed Constitutional Commission. Now, the terms of reference are very important because it really shaped the way the Constitution emerged. The key agreements on this were that the government would look to establish a strong central government with states and settlements or having some autonomy, that the position and prestige of their highnesses as constitutional rulers of their respective states would be respected, that a constitutional Yang Biktan Agong would be chosen from among the rulers, that there would be a common nationality, and the idea was clearly that it would be broader than the citizenship agreed under the Federation Agreement. And finally, that they would safeguard the special position of the Malays and the legitimate interests of other communities. The Alliance submission to the Commission on the 25th of September 1956 was very wide-ranging, but it emphasised the Malay identity of the country, including retaining the rulers in their respective states as constitutional rulers. In other words, in terms of agreeing with the terms of reference that I've mentioned. They also agreed that, or proposed that Islam should be the religion of Malaysia, though, and I quote, "The observance of the principles shall not impose any disability on non-Muslim nationals professing and practicing their own religions, and shall not imply that the state is not a secular state." Well, the double negative there makes it a little bit difficult to understand. But in other words, they're saying they agreed that the state should be a secular state. Now, the submission also recommended the retention of the Malay special position, and I've spelled out the full details of what that was there. Now, I don't think I need to go through them because I think the previous speaker has covered most of those. But what I just draw your attention to here is the difficult pathway they were trying to negotiate between saying right at the beginning that all nationals would be accorded equal rights, privileges and opportunities, and there must not be discrimination on the grounds of race or creed, but then talking about a special position for Malays in a way that we've already discussed. And of course, it's argued too that the Yang Biktan Agong should have special responsibilities for safeguarding that special position. In the oral submission to the Commission, the Alliance agreed that as a constitutional monarch, the Agong would have to act on the advice of the Cabinet, and that was an important clarification. But in addition to that, and this is something which was a surprise to me, I must confess, when I looked into this fairly recently, a year or so ago, when I did my research 40 years ago on this period, I thought that the idea that there had to be reconsideration of the special position after 15 years was something that had been pressed by the non-Malays in the Alliance and also been pressed by the Reid Commission itself. But in fact, now there is documents available which quote, and I've included the quotes here, that on the question of the special position of Malays, Sultan Razak, there is an added provision for review, and we suggested 15 years after the Declaration of Independence. And Tunku Abdul Rahman, of course soon to be the Prime Minister, said the suggestion is that there should be a review every 15 years. But however, if in the first 15 years, if there weren't suitable Malays available for opportunities under these arrangements, then you could appoint non-Malays as well. Now the Reid Commission largely followed the recommendations that have been made to it by the Alliance on all of these areas. It emphasised that as far as the Agong was concerned, he would have to act on the advice of ministers with regard to all executive actions. And similarly, state constitutions. They didn't specifically draw up any state constitutions, but they established an important principle for drawing them up, that the sultans also should not have independent powers. Now, under some of the constitutions, state constitutions existing at that time, the sultans did have fairly clearly specified independent powers. The Reid Commission argued that they should be, I quote, bound to accept and act on the advice of the Menteri Besar or the Executive Council, and the Menteri Besar or the Executive Council should not hold office at the pleasure of the ruler or be ultimately responsible to him but should be responsible to the Parliament, the Parliamentary Assembly. I think a development that clearly has some relevance to the recent difficulties in Perak. The Commission saw no need, it didn't really rule it out, but it saw no real need to specify that Islam was the religion of the country. The rulers were in fact against it. And these were tripartite negotiations involving the rulers, the alliance, and the British, because they were worried that if that was specified, then their own positions as head of Islam in the states might be seen as less important. So the Commission reported that and agreed with it. On the Malay special position, the Commission expressed concern that if the protection of the special position of Malay signified the granting of special privileges permanently to one community and not to the others, then there was a problem. So they followed the oral recommendations of the Alliance and agreed that Malays ought to have a substantial period where the existing quotas remained, that no new quotas should be created, and that 15 years on there should be a review to determine either to retain or to reduce or discontinue it entirely. And also to facilitate this, these arrangements should be included under transitional provisions in the Constitution, not permanent provisions. Now, there was one dissenting note, and we've already heard mention of this too, from Justice Abdul Hamid, who supported the Young Agong acting to safeguard the special position on his own rather than on ministerial advice, and endorsed the statement that Islam was the religion of the country. And he noted that some 15 countries, including Christian and Muslim, had incorporated such a declaration, which he described, and I think it was mentioned earlier, as innocuous. So in the final negotiations leading up to the adoption of the Constitution, all sides agreed on endorsing the role of the sultans and Agong as constitutional rulers, to ease their concerns that adopting Islam as the religion of the country might detract from the ruler's powers. An additional phrase was added, noting that all prerogatives and powers enjoyed by state rulers as head of Islamic affairs were unaffected and unimpaired. In addition to this change, other small alterations were made to earlier wording on Islamic matters proposed by the Alliance. So they dropped the earlier reference to a secular state, and they stated that simply that Islam is the religion of the Federation, other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony in any part of the Federation. Nonetheless, during negotiations in London in May 1957, the UMNO delegation there affirmed that they had no intention of creating a Muslim theocracy and that Malaya would be a secular state. And there are several British documents that also confirm this. Further, Section 11 of the Constitution, we've already heard mention of, reinforced individual rights to practice and propagate their own religion. Section 9 provided that states may make Islamic laws on various issues relating to family, inheritance and administration of Islamic institutions and charities, etc. Separate Sharia courts would adjudicate on these laws, but criminal law remained the preserve of federal courts. More substantial changes, however, were made to the Malay special position. In the face of strong criticism from within UMNO and from other Malay opposition groups, UMNO decided to abandon the requirement that the special position be included in transitional arrangements and reviewed after 15 years. However, Tun Razak reassured non-Malay partners by promising it was considered in the interest of the country and in the interest of the Malays themselves that the provisions of Article 153 should be reviewed from time to time. So, in conclusion, the 1957 Constitution acknowledges the Malay character of the country and recognises special needs of the Malay community. Nonetheless, non-Malays were given assurances that their rights were also guaranteed. Secondly, the Constitution established the Agong and Sultan as constitutional rulers. As such, they were expected to act on advice and of their own initiative. and indeed it's a feature of constitutional rulers throughout the world that any action they do take can be criticised. There are no majestic constitutional provisions or any separate law for this purpose in Malaysia, as for example in Thailand, so it would appear that there wasn't really any intention initially to forbid criticisms of the sovereigns, the rulers. The Constitution also intended that Malaya be a secular state, including the reference to Islam as the religion of the state was symbolically important, but not intended to change the essentially secular arrangements that existed at that time. And it didn't, one might note, state that Islam was the official religion. The special position of the Malays was not intended to be permanent, but subject to review. It was not a declaration of Malay dominance forever. Note also that the term used is special position. Kedudukan istimewa, not special rights or special privileges, hak istimewa, as it's very often inaccurately quoted as. It was also qualified by the obligation of the government to protect the legitimate interests of non-Malays and a range of guarantees on fundamental liberties in the Constitution. So this was a constitutional bargain non-Malays made with Malays through the alliance. It was not the promise of expanded citizenship rights in return for unquestioned Malay political dominance, as argued by Abdul Ahmad in his Singapore Ketuanan Melayu speech in August 1986, and now frequently referred to as the social contract that was agreed on back in 1957. I'll just acknowledge my indebtedness to the book that I've noted down here, which includes many of those documents that I've quoted from today. Thank you.
Invite our student representative, Mr. Aslam Abdul to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Salam sejahtera, Darjahau, Vanakkam, and a very good evening everyone. Salam satu Malaysia. I am lucky to be born as Malaysian, and I believe other Malaysians feel the same way too. The issues of race, religion, and royalty are not only sensitive, but also can cause resentment, which may lead to more critical consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, first R, race. Race to me is merely a social construct and does not necessarily refer to someone's roots. Most of the times, the state is the one who defines to which group you belong to. For instance, Javanese, Sundanese, Acehnese, or even Pakistani are considered Malays, whereas other non-Malays or Bumiputras or non-Chinese or non-Indians are considered as others. Interestingly, regardless of these distinct ethnic groups, traditions, and dialects, they are united through a common culture and a language. I strongly believe that a multiracial society is the essence of our identity as Malaysians. The stereotypes such as Chinese are greedy, Malays are lazy, indigenous groups are jungle people, and Indians are dishonest should no longer exist. I never believe in absolute meritocracy because I think affirmative action must be adopted if necessary. In the case of new economic policy, which favors the Malays and Bumiputras or indigenous groups, I feel that it is unfair. It is unfair. The help given should not be racial-based. Instead, it should be need-based, because poverty is not exclusive to certain races. It is a major problem across all races. As a cultural melting pot nation, each race has its own unique capabilities and strengths, which complement each other in forming a great force for all of us to move forward as a nation. Second R, religion. As for religion, the first principle of Rukun Negara and the sixth line of Negaraku, the national anthem, clearly state the importance of believing in God. Religion is the spiritual mediator between servants and their Lord. Religion gives a spiritual guidance in a person's life. Because to me, religion is not only about rituals, but more importantly, it is a way of life which encompasses every single aspect. An act needs not to be labeled as religious to be morally good. Instead, an act is always religious or morally good if it is in accordance to the religious ethics. In order to create a religious tolerance in Malaysia, as much as the official religion, Islam, should be respected, the rights of other religious minorities must be protected too. I can never comprehend what is in the mind of the religious bigots who attacked both churches and mosques in the name of God, as they call it. To resolve this hatred and misconceptions, understanding each other's religion through constant engagement is a key to build a good rapport between different faiths. Ladies and gentlemen, third R, royalty. As we all know, all Malaysians have high respect for the royal institution as an umbrella of all people in the country. In my point of view, as a non-partisan entity, the royalty symbolizes the separation of power in the state. The 1993 amendments to the Constitution of Malaysia, which saw the abolishment of the monarchy legal immunity, reflected that no one is above the law and constant reform is necessary with the institution. Today, our constitutional monarchy system allows ourselves to engage in a democratic process in which a monarch acts as a non-political and independent head of state within the boundaries of the Constitution. Therefore, in my point of view, the royalty refers more broadly than just the royal families. It refers to the separation of power between legislative, executive, and judiciary, as suggested by Montesquieu. I don't know how to emphasize more on the importance of these institutions' independence, because it is a manifestation of respect of our own system and institutions that are in place, as well as the will of the people. We must be clear that the rule of law must be restored, and hence, independent institutions are necessary to avoid abuse of power by any party. My fellow colleagues, to be frank with you, these are not only my thoughts on these issues. I have my own reservations which can be quite controversial. Before that, I'm just curious if this talk is being recorded. Yeah, it is. Well, just checking. I'm a bit worried if it will be used as an evidence to take action against me afterwards. Don't ask me why. Well, the moment I was invited to speak today, the first thing that came into my mind was about the consequences that I might face for getting involved in this kind of forum. That was the first thing, and in fact, major thing. Really? No kidding. Since I'm a sponsored student by the Malaysian government to study here at ANU, that adds more risk. I need to self-censor what I should or should not talk about to avoid any problems with anyone. Now, let's divert the discussion a bit to the freedom of speech, which is a tenet of democracy. Because how on earth can I proceed with my critical ideas if I have limited freedom to say what I think? Prime Minister Datuk Sri Najib Razak admitted that the era where the government knows best is over. This is the beginning of reform in Malaysia, which politicians become servants, no longer masters of the people. A government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Being a democratic country, the freedom of speech, assembly, and association are guaranteed as enshrined in Article 10 of the Federal Constitution. Unfortunately, the authorities think that this is an agenda of liberalizing Malaysia at the expense of local values. The term of freedom of speech is always hijacked with false concepts, especially when racial and religious sentiments are played for the interests of certain parties. Vision 2020 aims to create a first world country with first-class mentality citizens. My generation, the young generation, grew up in a different era, in which we are more exposed to the outside world. Our strong, inquisitive spirit encourages us to question and be critical to every single issue, and most importantly, we are very open to engage in discussions, to exchange ideas in order to find answers. Mahasiswa, university students or youth are often told to stay away from politics because our main business is to study. And ironically, the older generation complains about lack of awareness of current issues among the youth. The restriction of students' involvement in politics, either in Malaysia or overseas, distorts our critical thinking ability. In fact, I think youth can learn a lot by getting involved in politics. Because politics is not only confined to political party line, but it discusses about everyday life's issues. Take Australia as an example. University students have the freedom to participate actively in politics through ANU Liberal Club or ANU Refugee Action Committee. I too feel honoured to be in ANU Students' Labour Club to engage and understand domestic issues, as well as the unique accent in Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, I am neither an academic nor a politician to give a depth analysis about today's topic. Rather, I am just a student and a youth who wants to be heard on what has been happening in my beloved country, Malaysia. On behalf of my generation, the young generation, I am sorry. I am sorry that we cannot contribute much to the discussion like this and the overall democratic process. Why? Now, tell me, how can we expect the young generation to be aware of the current issues when we are always told to study and focus on exams? How can you expect young generation to have critical thinking and views when we know for the fact that our freedom of speech is not guaranteed by the state? Tell me. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I am calling for a reform in democracy in Malaysia. And I have a good faith. I have a good faith that everyone, the government, the opposition, the civil society and the general public share the same aspiration that one day we have the freedom to express our views without any fear. One day, all Malaysians, regardless of race, religion, or ideologies, can be united as Bangsa Malaysia. And I am positive that one day Malaysia can achieve all this. Terima kasih.
Our Ministry of Education of Malaysia won't go after him after his seditious speech. I hope so. And we can conclude with the three speakers with a very fine quote by Mr. late Karpal Singh. Jangan main-main dengan kelembagaan Malaysia, where our constitution of Malaysia was not upheld by the government. Thank you very much. And we would like to open our Q&A session to the floor. So for whomever who is interested, please raise up your hand and mention to whom you would like to direct to. Starts now. Rohan.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Very interesting and stimulating discussion and talk. It's just a comment and probably a question anybody can answer. I feel that there is much emphasis, on the term sensitive, sensitivities. This is how I think hegemonic, words, being promoted even by the politician himself. That this thing cannot be discussed. This thing cannot be taught. But how we are going to resolve if you don't talk? If you start, to say that, this is sensitive, by the virtue you're saying that this is sensitive, this is a young people who probably, much influenced by what, the panelists, say. By saying that it is sensitive, it put a certain kind of a limitation and guarded, in terms of what you want to say. For me, I do not think there is anything sensitive, if we are able to articulate rationally. Why there is a need, to put, something that is sensitive. We wouldn't settle anything if we keep bringing on, that this is sensitive, that is sensitive. We need to talk honestly, among us as nation. That point number one. Sorry, Joe, is it okay? Okay, yeah? Okay. Second one, I'm also a bit quite disturbed, by some of the, especially Tony Poa, when he starts, the way I look at the discourse mounted by Tony is a form of racialization. Once you start to use, the word like Malays, Ketuanan Melayu, of course there is such terms, but then when you start to use, such terms, you are entrenching, the idea of racialization. Not racism per se, but racialization. But this is the thing, that we need to not only just minimize, we need to dismantle. By keep on, harping on racial differences, it's not something, it's there, but it is not something that going to be, progressively moved, in order for us to achieve a more cohesive society. Second point, third point. Okay. Third point, I will also say that, some of the things that have been mentioned is quite simplified. That there are a more complex, dimension. For example, for me, when you talk about religion, there is also an element of the federation system within Malaysia. When you talk about, the kalimah Allah, you have to also understand that kalimah Allah itself, and of course there is like 20 other words, which is being banned from being used. This is a product of state law, which is, fortunately or unfortunately, it is a state assembly of Selangor, which is under Pakatan. So what is Pakatan Rakyat is doing instead of Selangor? You cannot just blame, that this is, no, this is a federal government, but this is, the problem of the state government itself, because the law is passed by the state assembly. So there is that complexity, within such issue. We cannot because other than when Tony was saying that, how come there is like two Allah, in one country, but we have 9 sultans in one country. Not only just that, we not only have when you are talking about Sharia law, there is 9 different Sharia law in Malaysia. Each state, have its own, if you are a bad husband who have divorced, your wife, if you want to get a more lenient, center, probably you move, to another state. That shows, that the distinctiveness of Sharia law within each state within Malaysia. And then, of course, there is also other law, which is the native law in Sabah and Sarawak. I think, there is also a discourse, of a multiculturalism within Malaysia, which is, the nature of how Malaysia was evolved is partly out of the so-called plural society that been constructed by the colonial, which give, a certain form of autonomy to each state. So we also need, to understand that thing. Okay, last, Last point. No, I'm just going to refer back to what Aslam is saying. You know, I'm actually quite disappointed. You know, when you blame the state. I mean, you got to believe, you know, on the ability of the agency itself. You know, I mean, it's easy way out. You know, oh, the state, you know, the Kerajaan Malaysia, you know, disallow this, disallow that. You know, but we as an individual have the capacity to do it. But sadly enough, I've been here for 3 months. You know, I don't really know, you know, about the culture here. But seriously, I find that despite people are saying that the local university student is like have no quality. I'm coming from a local university student in Malaysia. But I found local university in Malaysia is more radical than LNU student here, politically speaking. You know, we are trying to have like, you know, discussion, but it is not something that is attract people. You know, if in Malaysia, in my university, you know, which is people always make fun of that University Kampung Malaysia, which is UKM, we almost have like a weekly discussion which is politically charged. Not just that, despite the restriction, Malaysian students manage, you know, to do demonstration and protest. I haven't seen any that kind of energy, you know, in this so-called quality foreign student. Sorry to say, that's all.
Right, a very good question from questions from Rohan. Anyone from panelists would like to respond?
Rohan, eh?
Rohan.
Rohan.
Kasih
Thank you,
panas
Rohan.
lah.
Huh?
Kasih panas sikit.
I'll just quickly reply. I'm sure there are a lot of questions out there. It is sensitive in different contexts. But one question was sensitive. To Perkasa, it's sensitive because you should not touch Malay rights. To me, it's sensitive because I might go to jail.
I might also lost my scholarship.
So I think using the term sensitive is not wrong. It is just to describe the situation as is. It's not to say that it's sensitive, I don't talk about it. I think I spoke about it. It just means that it is an issue that creates a lot of emotions, both ways, by both sides of the defense. I think that's my context for using the word sensitive. Racialization. I would love to get into a discussion where I don't have to talk about race. But your topic says race and religion. and it is a reality. So my context of bringing race into the picture is to describe what is happening. It is not an endorsement of racialization. It is a description of what the political, socio-political events and happenings in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, you cannot run away from racial politics as is. It is a form of politics that I hope will be behind us perhaps in 20 years' time, 50 years' time. But as of today, it is real. And we have to deal with it. To pretend it's not there and not deal with it, we will not win in elections. We have to deal with it by how to neutralize racial politics. And to know how to neutralize racial politics, we have to understand why it's there in the first place. I can carry on, but I won't. And with regards to your comments on Allah in Selangor, fair, except just to highlight one point, the law was passed in 1988. So it's part of the entire system that was being put in place. Now, once the law is passed, it becomes extremely difficult. This is not an excuse for Selangor government. Okay, they should still face it, and I think some of you may have read my statements criticizing the Menteri Besar of Selangor on this. It becomes difficult. Okay, it's not easy to just go in there and amend the bill. It creates political consequences in the political context that we have today. So we would like to have things change such that the constitution is actually protected, but it will not be easy. But we should still do it. Our problem is we have not done it. And that's my critique for the Selangor Menteri Besar. But I think the whole reason why the raid, as an example, the Bible raid took place in Selangor in the first place was because it was being driven from the federal side. JAIS would not have acted if the environment created in the country was not conducive for them to raid
Bible Society of Malaysia. And JIS is, at this point in time, relatively independent. They are being funded by the Selangor state government, but they act. Selangor government? No, JIS is Selangor government. I'm very sure because I saw the funding in the budget. In the Selangor budget. They may have some grants from the federal government, but JIS Selangor is funded by Selangor government. So I'm not going to say that they are funded by federal. They are funded by Selangor government, but Selangor government have, in the act, have no control over the act of JIS. JIS is directly under MAIS, Majlis Agama Islam Selangor, which is headed by the Sultan. So if you go against JIS, you are going against the Sultan, and hence the entire sensitive, seditious issues that comes into play. So it is, as you said, a very complex and layered issue. It needs to be dealt with, but dealing with it, there's no real simple solution. It has to be political, and we have to take relevant steps. For Aslam, let me, before he speaks, let me defend on his behalf. I think it is true that there are groups in the local universities, I deal with them, which are more radical than this in Malaysia. But they are not the majority, I think you know that. And that's why in most of the universities, the what do you call it, the so-called more pro-establishments, they win easily. Only in a couple, less than a handful of universities, the more so-called radical group wins. That's number one. Number two, those who come here on scholarships, they are bound. And I think it's fair for me to say that for those who are bound by the Malaysian government, it is fair for them to be politically aware, know what's happening, but take your time, fight the battle where it's worth it. No? For Aslam, I'll tell him, finish your exams, make sure the government pay for all your fees, then go back and fight. Why fight here?
Okay, right. I just want to touch on the first issue. I agree with you that, you know, these things are sensitive realistically. But again, we shouldn't stop from discussing about this issue. Of course, it's sensitive, but we shouldn't stop discussing about these issues. And of course, it depends on the context actually. Maybe among the older generation, they think these issues are sensitive, but not with the younger generation. My generation, we don't think, we make friends with everyone, regardless of your race or religion. So, of course, it depends on the context. And again, even though there are sensitive issues, but we never ever stop discussing about it. Anyway, I agree with the comment about, you know, of course, there are groups in Malaysia who are vocal, and not every student, you know, are politically aware about what's happening in Malaysia. But I guess, you know, the restriction that is being made actually prohibits students from thinking critically. I'm not saying that which side you should support, either the opposition or the government. I'm saying why, you know, you don't let people to express their opinions and views. Even among, let's say, Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, he's the former Deputy Minister for Higher Education. He also mentioned the same thing. You know, it is okay for students to actually express their opinions and views, especially we are university students. I just can't understand why, when we are being critical towards the government, then we are labelled as opposition. Then how can we improve our country? Because whenever we say something that is critical, then we are labelled as someone who lupa daratan, someone who pengkhianat negara. So this is something unfair. Thank you.
Okay, guys, due to time constraint, please shorten and summarize your questions. Alright, I will go for Dahlia first. Yeah, okay, we'll do suggestions from YB Tony. We will take a few questions. Dahlia?
Okay, this is mostly directed for YB Tony, but anyone else can answer. It relates to something you said in your speech about in the context of Pakatan, how if they were talking about Malays who needed help, then there would be an issue. I think that among some Malay nationalist politicians, there is a very real fear that Malays are under threat. I think this, goes back to some stereotypes actually about Malays. Mahathir wrote about it in the Malay Dilemma. And actually when I interviewed Ibrahim Ali in 2011, he told me that the problem with Malays was that they're too generous and therefore they are prone to being taken advantage of. And that's why the Malays needed special advocacy. And it also goes back to what you said, your anecdote at the end. I'm thinking about Najib Razak saying last year, how can the minority protect the rights of the majority? So I do think that there's a very real fear. And how do you negotiate with that? How do you engage with people who hold that fear to be real?
Right, thank you, Dahlia. Next topic.
I think my question builds very well on the point that was raised. And also, I think this question goes to all of you, and I would like to hear a response on this front. Understanding that the discussion and the space for the discussion in Malaysia has now been so polarized to the point that it's difficult to have a reasoned, level-headed discussion on issues, and at the same time everyone, it seems to be sensitive as it is now called. And I'm going out on a limb here when I ask, how do you see this thing get resolved in the first place? How do you think we can move forward in this discussion if the government is so entrenched on trying to play this racial religious card, and it is creating a lot of rife in the country? To me, as a Singaporean, I actually see this is a hotbed of fundamentalism that is happening in our backyard that might actually just boil over into instability and racial violence. So, do you actually see this as a real possibility that at the end of the day, for the country to move forward, a revolution has to happen? So, this is why I put it out on a limb, because I do not see, as an outsider, I don't see this issue being resolved peacefully, because there's so much entrenched interest, and the polarization is so entrenched at the moment. How do you actually find a way out? And I think this builds on the question of the real threat that the majority actually face when it comes to extending the rights to other races and religions as well.
All right, thank you very much. One more question. All right.
I have two questions. The first one is, to what extent do you think religion limits the freedom of speech in Malaysia? Or, in your opinion, how much is censored because of race and or religion? And the other question is, do you think that the monarch and its functionalities will be relevant in the future, for the future generation, like for our generation? And if yes, in what ways? That's two questions.
All right, let the panelists answer now.
Affirmative action, race-based. I think it's important to set out the ideals that the best way to help the poor Malays is to have affirmative action by needs. I agree with what Aslam said in the sense that it cannot be entirely based on merit. It has to be affirmative action based on needs to provide better opportunities for those who are on the lower tier of our society. Now, what happens when you have affirmative action based on race is that those who are better off are better able to exploit the opportunities provided by affirmative action based on race. So the people who are gaining the most from a race-based policy that's currently entrenched in our NAP are those who are big. I think that question is asked in Australia. When your prince and Duchess of what was it? Duchess of Cambridge came, I think that question was very much discussed in the media. That question is also sometimes asked in the UK, but I believe that Malaysia is nowhere near ready for that question to be asked. And perhaps at this point in time, that is not the most important question to ask. I think the focus has to be on good governance. The focus has to be the respect for the rule of law, as well as to ensure that our monies, the taxpayers' monies and the country's wealth are properly managed to ensure that the people have a better standard of living. I think that will be the core question, the priority question to deal with. Any issues with monarchy, we deal with it long time to come. That's the least of our problems as at this point in time.
make a brief comment. I hope my reference to newspapers is correct this time. It seems it wasn't last time. According to the newspapers, the head of the censorship board under the Home Affairs Ministry is none other than the Mufti of Perak. Correct? I'll have to keep on sending you queries, I think, about what I see in Malaysian newspapers. But also, just on the issue of the rulers, I'd actually suggested that Professor Milner might be the best person to be speaking at this function tonight rather than me. And he has basically made a lifetime journey looking at the monarchy in Malaysia, and he would, I'm sure, have lots of reasons why it's extremely important.
I would like to comment on how can we change Malaysia. Of course, I don't prefer revolution because we see what's happening in other countries, like in Arab countries especially, and they are still struggling to stabilize their countries. So I always believe that Malaysians are peaceful people, and we believe in democracy. We believe in changing the country in a proper way, in a democratic way. So that's why I'm calling for freedom of speech and expression, because I know that is the way to move forward, and we can discuss different ideas from different sides. And I believe, regardless which side you support, you always support the freedom of speech. And I think in this case, engaging in debates is very important. These issues are sensitive, but we shouldn't stop discussing about it, because I get involved in refugee issues in Australia, so it is a sensitive issue in Australia as well. But when I get involved with Amnesty International, so we actually go to different locations in Australia to explain about what's happening there, and they change their views. At least they have the opportunity to listen from the other side. So I think the same thing for Malaysia as well. We shouldn't censor anyone to say something that is different for our views. We should let both sides to say whatever they want, and later on, I think Malaysians are mature enough to decide which side they would prefer to. Because challenge number 3 in the Vision 2020, fostering and developing a mature democratic society. This is the challenge was outlined by Dr. Mahathir, the former Prime Minister. We respect him so much, and we want to achieve Vision 2020, and he outlined this challenge. And in order to meet Vision 2020, we must achieve this challenge, and that is what I think. Thank you.
Right, next. Any questions anymore? Is there any question anymore? All right, last question there. Last one, is there any more? All right, last call.
Yeah, the whole talk today was about, one part of it was reducing racialization in Malaysia. So I'm just wondering, the current ruling government in Malaysia is Barisan Nasional, right? And is the big parties are UMNO, MCA, and MIC, which are predominantly race-based. Just wondering, and I mean, even in the opposition, DAP is seen as Chinese, and PAS is like the Islam, the more religion-based party. So I'm just wondering what the panel think about the relevance of race-based parties in Malaysia going forward.
No, here's the last one.
Oh,
Yep.
Race-based parties should be made irrelevant in Malaysia, as what our friend Rohan said just now. DAP is seen predominantly Chinese with a good majority, good substantial presence of Indians. We have the largest number of Indian MPs in the parliament. For a simple reason, not because we don't want Malays in there, but it's hard for us to compete for Malays' attention. It's hard to fight for Malays who wants to join us to fight for equality versus another party who fights for preferences for their race. It is just an unfair game. But we'll carry on with that because we believe that we are all Malaysians, and barring the provisions that has been outlined in the Constitution earlier, which we fully respect, Everything else we believe should be on an equal footing, and all affirmative action should be based on needs. And I think based on needs, that's actually the best for Malays themselves and all other Malaysians than on race. So I believe that race-based politics is actually very, what do you call it, not just damaging, it's actually very destructive. Why is it destructive? How I would look at the Malaysian political or racial context, interracial context development over the last 50 years is very simply the alliance arrangement. You have UMNO representing the Malays, the MC representing Chinese, the MIC representing the Indians, Gerakan don't know who. That arrangement was useful and it worked purely because there was room. There was plenty of room for everyone back in the 1950s. So economy was growing, everyone had room to grow. There was very little friction between the three parties. But when the economy gets to a stage where the growth of the overall economy can no longer sustain the demands of each of these individual parties, then the clamoring for additional rights and interests at the expense of the other party starts to increase. And that's where you have all these groups based on race, the trade group based on race, asking for more contracts from particular departments, particular sectors, more privileges, more controls, less open tenders, etc., getting into place. And it's no longer about growing the pie so that everyone gets more. It's about me getting a bigger piece of the pie relative to the others. And that's where the destruction comes about. And it is a losing game for the minorities. It is a losing game both because they are minorities and secondly because they are shrinking as a proportion of the population. You Chinese are not productive enough. So that's the either that or you're all migrating to Australia. But that is the problem that we face. So the taking the looking at the future of Malaysia, if the race divide, the race-based politics is to continue, then it will only, in my view, destroy Malaysia. Or it will leave very little space for minorities, so basically telling you, just get up. So that landscape has to change. And what we believe in the Pakatan Rakyat Alliance, at least our philosophy, is very simple, and this is stated in our, whether you call it the common policy framework or the manifesto, very clearly. And this is one of the reasons why I was convinced about Anwar's leadership, despite his UMNO pass. Okay? Because he was willing to go to the Malay kampongs. You know, we talk one language to you Chinese and talk something else with the Malays in the kampong. That happens for a lot of politicians. But what I saw myself was he went to the kampongs, the most difficult challenge of all, and tried to sell them the Malaysian economic agenda, which is basically affirmative action based on needs and not based on race. Because he sold it that affirmative action based on race has been exploited by the cronies, by the corrupt, to enrich themselves at their expense. It is a very difficult sell, and as at this stage, we have not won over the logic of it yet. Our proportion of votes in the rural areas are something in the region of 30, perhaps 35%. And it is a big challenge. But that has to be the line we take, and we hope that as to put it very crudely, the old fogies drop off the cliff and the new voters come into the electorate, we will be able to change that particular electoral landscape.
About the race-based political parties, actually, if you study history in school, actually Dato' On, he was calling for the formation of Parti Negara, which comprised of parties from, members from all races, regardless of race or religion in Malaysia. But the idea was abandoned because at that time it was popular or was politically correct for the political parties to form race-based political parties. And nowadays, I think the trend has changed because we see nowadays, even our Prime Minister calls for one Malaysia, and the opposition, for example, form coalition with different, let's say, the AP and PAS, conservative Muslims, and also the majority Chinese political party. They form coalition because they know in order to govern this country, it is a multiracial society, and we can't deny the fact that we are living in a multiracial society. Even though someone lives in Kelantan, let's say someone lives in Kelantan, majority are Malays, but at the end of the day, how to govern the country, Malaysia, we need to cooperate with other either minorities like the Chinese communities or Indian communities, and I think it is time for us to think about this issue. And actually what matters to me most is about the policies, how we govern the country. Regardless if you have racial-based party politics or multiracial political parties. But at the end of the day, what the people want is, of course, how you govern and treat your people. It's about rule of law, how you give economic justice, how do you give justice, social justice to everyone. So it is not really about political, racial-based parties or multiracial-based parties. What we want is the real policies and real actions by the government, opposition, civil society, and the general public.
Right, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to our panelists and our forum organizers. Our forum ends here. Thank you very much.